What's up, everybody? Ryan Adams here, Adams Group at Compass. Wait! Before we go into our episode, please stop this moment. Look down, do a little check on the subscribe button or push the button and ring the bell, click the bell, whatever you do to the bell to make sure you're subscribed to Ryan in Real Estate so you get this wonderful information we're throwing your way. Today, we are talking about the magical word of appraisal. What happens when your home that you are buying or you're selling doesn't appraise? What do? So this is happening actually a lot in today's market because it's so competitive, the inventory is so low, and it's making people pay more than they probably normally would. This is what's called a seller's market. And so because of that, people are kind of throwing some tricks out there and overpaying in a sense for a home, overbidding, multiple offers. We're seeing that almost every listing we have, multiple offers. And we have some people waiving the appraisal, which is another issue in of itself. And then we have people just, giving us a lot more than what we were even asking. So what happens if it doesn't appraise? First off, you go under contract for sales price. Let's say the sales price is $500,000 and you're under contract for that. Well, if you're using a lender, that lender is going to hire an appraisal management company to go do an appraisal in the home to make sure that this house is worth what we're saying it is per the contract. So they send the appraiser out, appraiser goes out and he writes an appraisal and he's using comps. And sometimes these appraisers, they know the area well. Sometimes you get a good appraiser, sometimes you get appraisers that don't necessarily know the area. And when that happens, and that's another reason why you want to use a great real estate agent who does know your area, is when that does happen, sometimes they don't write up a good appraisal. And I would also start by saying this. When you're choosing a real estate agent, make sure they know what they're doing when they're suggesting an offer price for you. Because if they're just like, hey, this is what you're gonna have to do to get it, but it's probably not going to appraise, that needs to be something they need to make sure and communicate to you, because the appraisal process happens typically after the option period and sometimes after the third party contingency, which usually is 17 to 21 days. And appraisals are taking a long time right now. So a lot of times that's happening after, and then guess what happens if it doesn't appraise? Well, your earnest money that you're putting down, 1% to 2%, whatever it might be, is now up for grabs if you're past the option period and the third party contingency. So make sure your real estate agent, and if again, as always, if you need one, we'd love to help you here at the Adams Group, but make sure your real estate agent is making sure you're understanding that timeline. So what happens if it doesn't appraise? Priced at $500,000, it comes in, the appraiser comes in at $470,000, which means that the appraiser believes that this price is worth $30,000 less than what the sales price is. Well, your lender is not going to give you a loan for the full amount if he is using that appraisal and the appraisal says it's not worth that. They're going to give you an amount based on what the appraisal is at, or what the sales price is at if the appraisal is higher than the sales price. Hopefully that made sense. Okay, so here's what you do if it doesn't appraise. And if you need coaching on this to your real estate agent, have them give me a call. I'll be glad to tell. Number one, the first thing you can do is some lenders will allow you to appeal the appraisal. You can, by sending better comps and why you think these comps work. And so as a buyer or a seller, whatever, and here's the reality though, whether you're a seller or a buyer, you want it to appraise. Because in the end, we all agree this is what we're gonna pay for the house. The seller did, the buyer did. Everybody wants it to appraise. So sending comps and get your help with the listing agent and the buyer agent, getting together and go, what are the best comps to support the sales price that we chose to use, or chose to offer and we agreed upon. So appeal that. You send that to the current appraiser, and that appraiser reevaluates it, sees if he was off a little bit, whatever. I will tell you, probably 7 out of 10 times the appeal does not work. So, but you give it a try. And that's a totally made up stat, but I would say just from my guess, more times than not, it does not work. The second thing you can do is ask for a second appraisal. Appraisals cost somewhere around 400, 500 bucks. That means the buyer, and you could probably negotiate the seller to do this as well. And if it's a $30,000 difference and you got to pay an extra 400, 500 bucks, maybe it's worth it. But you can ask for a second appraisal and a new appraiser. Most lending companies do not allow this to happen, but it can happen. So that would be my number 2, is ask for a new second appraisal. Number 3, and this is what typically happens. Out of 9 times out of 10, this is what happens when it doesn't appraise, is you negotiate. Most of the time, seller comes down a little bit, the buyer comes up a little bit, and buyer's going to bring additional cash, because remember, he cannot get more money from the bank at that point because it didn't break value, and the seller has to drop their price a little bit. Sometimes from the buyer's perspective, they're like, hey, we're not going to give you any more money because it's not worth what you said it was worth or what we offered. And then the seller's perspective is, hey, you offered this, you should pay this. But everybody's singing from different positions. The reality is 2 people come together, one comes up, one comes down a little bit. That's typically what happens. And you can do it all kinds of different ways. Buyer goes 30%, seller comes down 70%, whatever, however you want to do it. But that's typically. Second is negotiate. And whatever you negotiate, that additional amount has to come out of the buyer or seller's pocket, not anything to do with the lender. The fourth thing you can do is the buyer, if you're paying like 20% down, and this is per lender, can roll the extra appraisal amount into their loan. Really, that's paying out of pocket, but that is, most lenders will allow you to do that, is roll that extra additional amount into that loan. And then the fifth, and the worst, and no one ever wants this to happen, but the other thing that you can do, from a buyer perspective, you can back out. You can say, I'm not gonna pay any more than what I said I was gonna do, so here's my termination paper, I'm not going to get the property. Now, if you're outside of the third party contingency, you will probably lose your earnest money. But if you are inside the third party contingency, you could get your earnest money back if you did this prior to that deadline. From a seller perspective, you can just say, you don't have to say I'm backing out, but you can say, the line is drawn in the sand and I'm not dropping it $1. And you put the pressure on the buyer to make a decision. Do I want to pay the additional amount, or am I going to walk? Most of the time, the buyers are already in with their earnest money. And if they're out of third party contingency, they're in for that, at least the earnest money, which is typically 1%. So in this case, 5,000 bucks. They paid for inspection. They paid for the appraisal. There's probably some other fees they got there, the option fee, all of that. And all that money adds up and goes, is it worth me dropping the 8,000 I've already invested into this, or putting that pressure on the buyer to make them make that decision, or should I just pony it up and figure out a way to do it? So that's it. It's not a great situation. And here's what I can tell you. It takes skilled real estate agents to handle this and to know from experience what typically happens in this type of a situation. So there it is there. We're talking appraisals. Again, thanks for listening. Click the subscribe button, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Ryan and Real Estate. Have a great one.